She was the symbol of an empire, the Virgin Queen who ruled with intellect, with iron will, and with a layer of white makeup so thick no one could see the real skin underneath. But behind the glittering crown and the dazzling court, Queen Elizabeth I hid a truth, far less fragrant. She didn't wash her hair. She almost never washed her face. And according to legend, she bathed only once a month, whether she needed to or not. It's said that her breath was so foul, people nearby had to turn away, and that her royal smile had blackened to the point of becoming a trend at court. But Elizabeth didn't care about cleanliness in the modern sense. To her, bad odors could be masked with perfumes, rotting teeth could be disguised with power, and that thick white mask of lead, though poisonous, mattered more than health, because in her world, appearance wasn't just image, it was a weapon. This is not a story for the faint of heart, because what you're about to discover will make you question, can a woman hold up an entire kingdom while her own body is slowly rotting from within? Get ready. These are the top 5 most disgusting hygiene habits of Queen Elizabeth I, and the last one will leave you stunned. In the famous surviving portraits of Elizabeth I, her hair always appears meticulously styled, perfectly curled, and dusted with white powder, but few know that hair wasn't hers. According to historical accounts, the Queen's real hair was almost never washed. Throughout her decades of reign, there is no mention of any ritual involving soap or water touching her scalp. Washing her hair was considered dangerous, especially for a woman who wore excessive amounts of lead and mercury-based cosmetics. Water could loosen the egg-white glue she used to fix her hair in place, wash away the fragrant powder applied to her scalp, and worse still, expose the real body beneath the royal mask. When her natural hair began to fall out, likely due to years of toxic cosmetic use, Elizabeth replaced it with thick wigs, often auburn in color, perfumed and heavily powdered. Beneath those wigs was a scalp that had begun to decay, inflamed, and at times blistered. But she never allowed that truth to be seen, even banning mirrors from her private chambers, as if she herself refused to witness her own reflection. It is said that one particular lady-in-waiting was assigned the sole duty of patting powder onto the back of the Queen's neck and shoulders every morning, even when no one else would see. Any contact with her real skin had become taboo, like touching something sacred already rotting. She didn't need to bathe. She didn't need to wash. A bit of fragrant powder and a few drops of rose water were enough for her to emerge before the court like a living deity. But behind that sweet, perfumed aura was a body quietly falling apart. But hair was only a small part of the strange and carefully constructed illusion of cleanliness that Elizabeth built around herself. Perhaps the most shocking and controversial aspect was her relationship with water. According to a legend passed down for centuries, Elizabeth once made a chilling remark, "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not." While historians still debate its accuracy, what remains from that era suggests, if any queen ever avoided water to an extreme, it was her. Elizabeth's palaces had no plumbing, no running water, and no baths in the modern sense. If she wanted to bathe, the process began with hauling in a massive wooden tub, boiling dozens of buckets of water, and carrying them by hand into her private chambers, all for a brief soak that lasted only minutes. And no one was allowed to remain in the room. No one could witness the real skin beneath the fabric. the cosmetics, the power. But Elizabeth didn't need water to feel clean. She had her own rituals. Each day, she changed at least 2 to 3 layers of white linen undergarments. It was believed that this fine fabric could absorb sweat, dirt, and even sin. When her skin needed refreshing, there was no soap involved, only a few drops of herbal-infused vinegar or rosewater distilled by the royal apothecary, gently dabbed onto a cloth, then pressed softly onto her neck, wrists, and elbows, the only areas she permitted to be cleansed. In Elizabeth's worldview, water was not salvation, it was a threat. It could soften the skin, making the body vulnerable to bad air. The so-called miasma thought to cause plague and death, but deeper still, she feared water not for its illness, but for its truth. Water could wash away everything: the white powder, the perfume, the mask, and the eternal illusion of an untouchable queen. In Elizabeth's world, even a single drop of water could make her human. And yet, no matter how much she avoided water, there was one part of Elizabeth's body she could never fully hide: her mouth. The royal smile, once a symbol of confidence and authority, over time became one of the most disturbing secrets in the Tudor court. Those who had the chance to meet Elizabeth up close recorded that her breath was nauseatingly foul. At times, her speech became difficult to understand because most of her teeth had fallen out. But the horror didn't stop there. While the rest of Europe was still fumbling to understand dental hygiene, Elizabeth invented her own kind of toothpaste, a homemade mixture of sugar and herbs. Yes, sugar, a luxury so rare that only the nobility could afford it, was what she used to scrub her teeth each morning. With each brushing, her enamel wore away. The protective layer vanished, leaving behind darkened, decaying dentin. But sugar was a symbol of wealth, and sweets were a display of royal power, so she didn't stop. Her meals were feasts of syrup, candied fruit, and honey-soaked almond cakes, and her teeth crumbled bit by bit with every bite. By the 1590s, foreign ambassadors reported that Elizabeth's teeth had nearly disappeared entirely. One courtier even described how she could barely speak clearly, as her mouth had become a dark, reeking void. Yet even when doctors urged her to remove what few rotten teeth remained to prevent infection, she refused. A loyal servant once volunteered to have one of his own teeth pulled in her presence, just to show it wouldn't be fatal. Elizabeth simply watched, saying nothing. By the 1590s, foreign ambassadors reported that Elizabeth's teeth had nearly disappeared entirely. One courtier even described how she could barely speak clearly, as her mouth had become a dark, reeking void. Yet even when doctors urged her to remove what few rotten teeth remained to prevent infection, she refused. A loyal servant once volunteered to have one of his own teeth pulled in her presence, just to show it wouldn't be fatal. Elizabeth simply watched, saying nothing. The most frightening part? She wasn't ashamed. On the contrary, her blackened teeth and fetid breath became a trend. In acts of devotion, noble women began to blacken their own teeth with soot, charcoal, and dye. In Elizabeth's court, tooth decay was no longer feared. It was fashionable. Once again, Elizabeth had no need to conceal her decline because she could turn it into a standard. She didn't need white teeth. She didn't need fresh breath. she only needed people to believe that her smile, however rotten, was still the smile of a queen. But if a decaying smile could become a symbol, what else in Elizabeth's biological reality might have been concealed? There was one thing that even she, with all her power and protocol, could not escape. The act of relieving herself, in an age without sewage systems, where royal palaces were more splendid than any place on earth but lacked even a proper toilet. Managing bodily needs became one of the strangest and most revealing aspects of royal life. Yet for Elizabeth, even the act of using the toilet was carefully staged as part of her performance of power. Her toilet was known as the close stool, essentially an ornate wooden chair, padded with velvet and trimmed with gold tassels, with a circular hole cut in the seat and a porcelain chamber pot placed beneath. This was no ordinary seat. It was a miniature throne reserved for the Queen's most private moments. And who had the honor of tending to this royal chamber pot? Not an anonymous servant. It was a nobleman of rank, the man appointed Groom of the Stool. Don't be misled by the title. This was not just a toilet attendant. He was one of the most powerful, trusted figures in the Tudor court, carefully chosen for his loyalty and absolute discretion. This man helped Elizabeth change clothes, assisted her in bathing, and even participated in political discussions while she was using the toilet. In the Tudor court, being present in the Queen's most vulnerable moments meant being dangerously close to the seat of power. But what about the rest of the palace? The answer is horrifying. There were no flushing toilets, no private lavatories, only chamber pots, buckets, and cesspits located directly beneath floorboards or outside palace walls. At night, men known as gong farmers or night soilmen, whose job was to remove human waste, would carry sloshing buckets through narrow hallways, up spiral staircases, weaving past royal bedchambers to dump the contents into open drains. The stench seeped into every stone. Straw mats soaked in scented oils were laid across the floors, but rarely changed. Beneath them built up layers of dust, garbage, shed hair, insect remains, and years' worth of human waste. Even Elizabeth, surrounded by perfumed gloves and embroidered handkerchiefs, could not fully escape the smell. She frequently moved from one palace to another, not just to avoid disease or for political reasons as commonly believed, but to flee the stench that no perfume could mask. In that golden world, power lived beside filth, and a woman could sit on the throne for a lifetime and still live with the stench of her own body. But perhaps the most haunting of all was her face. In the memory of England, the face of Elizabeth I is immortal, pale, flawless, almost otherworldly, like a porcelain saint carved in white. But after decades on the throne, a few remembered what her real skin looked like, because she never allowed anyone, not even herself, to see it. Elizabeth never removed her makeup. She didn't wash her face. No water. No cloth. No soap. Nothing was ever allowed to strip away the heavy white powder layered on her skin each day. Instead, day after day, she simply added another layer on top of the last, as though plastering over a crumbling wall. The cosmetic she used, Venetian ceruse, was a deadly mixture of white lead and vinegar. It created the illusion of smooth, luminous skin that shimmered like pearl in candlelight, but slowly ate away at the real flesh underneath. Physicians of the time didn't know exactly what was killing the Queen, but Elizabeth didn't care. To her, the mask wasn't makeup, it was the throne. Ladies of the bedchamber recalled that the makeup was so thick It had to be scraped gently each morning with a silver spoon or horn blade, smoothing out the cracked and flaking areas before a fresh coat was applied. The powder was brushed on with animal hairbrushes or simply dabbed in long, deliberate strokes with a piece of dry wool, dragged across her cheeks, forehead, and neck, until no trace of the real woman remained. When her skin began to blister, peel, and bleed, she didn't stop. She only pressed harder. That powder wasn't meant to beautify. It was meant to hide the rot. In her final years, Elizabeth banned mirrors from her private chambers. No one was allowed to speak of aging. Portrait painters were instructed to reuse older templates, never to paint her from life. Rumors even claimed she had a dedicated maid whose sole task was to dust powder onto her shoulders each morning, even when no one was watching, to preserve the illusion. She was no longer a woman. She was an image, a legend. And that image, even as it cracked and decayed beneath the lead, had to survive until her very last breath. In the radiant glow of the Elizabethan era, the world saw a queen who commanded a kingdom, defeated her enemies, and brought glory to England. But in the shadows behind the palace walls, there was a body falling apart, a face too afraid to be wiped clean, and a throne steeped in powder, perfume and waste. Elizabeth I did not fear poverty, war, or solitude. She feared only one thing: being seen as a real human being. Without the white lead, she would be just a woman growing old. Without the perfume, she would carry the scent of her own body. Without the performance, she would have to face the truth that even a queen can decay from the inside out. Her strange, unsettling, even grotesque hygiene habits were not accidental. They were a calculated political strategy, carried out to the furthest edge of pain and obsession. Because in her time, preserving the image was more important than preserving life. And perhaps what made Elizabeth a legend was not her victories or her titles, but the fact that she convinced the world she could never rot. But the truth is, she was already rotting while alive. Only no one dared to say it.